it felt like stuff was leaving our house. It's kind of weird feeling, like the presence of something was leaving. And stuff like that happened a few times. Whenever we had like an issue going on, you called her, declared it in Jesus' name that his foot would be healed. About 15 minutes later, he came back over after the line started up and we were working. He's like, dude.
What kind of advice would you give to somebody wanting to start off at any level of this process?
I'll say some of the easier things to grow if you're just starting. And our kids running around in the background doing cartwheels and farting while we're videoing. That stuff happens all the time. You never know what's going to happen when you post something on social media. And then I had a guy come in. He said, you need to take every piece of plaster out of this house. I ran into my corn trying to spook out whatever it was so I could just totally light it up. And I jumped in there. And when I landed, I looked around with a flashlight all around me. Like I jumped into the middle of a whole family of.
Oh, no. Hey, this is Matt with the Charting Life podcast. Before we get into the show, I just want to make a quick announcement. I'm wanting to experiment and try something different. I've had some feedback, and I know the full-length podcast can be a bit too much for some. For the next few episodes, I will release segments of the episode on YouTube. Just search Charting Life Podcast like you would anywhere else you get your podcast. These will upload before the full episode is released, wherever you would normally get your podcast. So YouTube's going to have shorter segments, and the full podcast be on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you like to get your podcast. I would love to know if this is something you like. You can always reach me at chartinglifepodcast@gmail.com. And I want to sincerely thank you for listening to the show and coming back for more. This show is something that has been on my heart and on my mind for some time, and I am thrilled to make this a reality. I hope this show encourages you, makes you laugh, and inspires you to chart your own island. Now back to the show.
Or some kind of issue about homesteading that, a perception that people have about homesteading that isn't true. And that one I was like, yeah, I could totally.
You got some stuff.
and the house renovation, yeah.
And I know you've got some cool church stories, prayer meetings from grandma, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So do you think you have one or two you'd be willing to share?
Yeah, sure. Some of those were pretty cool. My Aunt Ada, she was, the spiritual mom. Mm-hmm. She was like, she cleaned the church, but she also babysit us when we were young. And even when we were, I was like, 5 years old, she would have people constantly coming over her house just to pray with. I mean, her door was just open to anyone. And, she would have Jehovah's Witnesses come and knock on her door, and she would listen to everything they had to say. And then she would be like, okay, now let me talk to you guys. And they were, fighting to get out of that. They were trying to get away from her. Everybody was always like, oh no, here comes the Jehovah's Witnesses. Let's close the door. But yeah, she would pray with people. And, I had like a bucket of toys over there, and we'd be playing with toys. And she would be in a prayer closet, or she would have people over praying. And I mean, it was full blown speaking in tongues, like spiritual warfare. The fire from heaven was coming down, and I'm over there playing with G.I. Joes in the corner. And it just became like, normal. It wasn't a big deal where, if I had a friend over, he would be scared to death because he's like, a demon just ran out of the house. But that was just, that was how she was. And she would come over our house, and she called it like cleaning your house. Like my mom and dad were having marriage trouble, and I was a kid. I didn't really know what was going on. And when I was a kid, I was a kid. I didn't pay attention to a lot of adult stuff, and it's good and bad. Right. I didn't know what was going on, and I enjoyed my childhood a lot because I was playing. But she would come over and pray over every room in our house. And I mean, I kind of knew stuff was going on, but I didn't know the details of it. I was just too young to understand. And I remember she told us to stand by the door and hold the door open. And she propped the door open, the storm door open, and she pleaded the blood of Jesus through every room in our house. And I could literally feel like, and I thought, it's just a draft, like the wind blowing through the house. But it was like there was nothing, and then it would be like I don't know, maybe I was a kid, but it felt like stuff was leaving our house. Wow. There was like a lighting, the house got lighter kind of weird feeling, like the presence of something was leaving, and stuff like that happened a few times. You know, we would whenever we had like an issue going on, you called her like, you know, hey, somebody was in a car wreck, call Aunt Ada, she's gonna pray. Stephanie had we had a humming. I mean, it's just fun. Some of it's funny stuff. You know, God doesn't care what's big and little.
Right.
He's everything and everybody. You know, he's just there. And Stephanie had caught a hummingbird in her garage at her home where she, you know, with her parents. And she's always been like an animal person. It's just, this is important to her. She just isn't going to leave the door open and let the hummingbird fly out. She's going to rescue this animal. So, of course, I'm there, so I have to be involved. And I had a fishing net, so I'm running around inside the garage. And the way that birds, they just will not go out the big open door.
Right.
They go above it, around it. And she had the net, and she hit this bird accidentally and totally just, I mean, it was like dead.
Oh, wow.
It was so bad. It was
I bet
like,
she felt horrible.
Oh, she was crying. It was bad. And the first thing she said was, get the phone and call your Aunt Ada. And it was just funny because I was like, okay, you know, you just killed this bird. Like, I'm going to call her and be like, but my Aunt Ada didn't care. To her, she understood, and she immediately started praying over the phone to Stephanie. And that bird woke up and flew out of her hand. And
wow.
Stephanie was like so happy. Like, that was one of these like God moments for her.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, when she hit that bird, it crunched. Like, oof. It was like,
yeah.
And it was just, you know, that's something that she's still like, she'll talk about that. Like, she's like, hey, you know, this bird came back.
Oh, man.
But, you know, there was a time when I was at work and I had a buddy who, and, you know, I didn't do this. This was all a God thing. It was all set up. This guy was always complaining about his leg, and he was my team leader. He's older than me, and he had this bad foot problem where he just couldn't, he was limping all the time. And he was a Christian. His dad was a pastor. But I'm not sure what denomination or anything. I didn't know, you know, what they believed in.
Right.
And he was limping by me. He was trying to he was wanting to run in the Derby marathon thing. And he was always complaining about it. And he would come and talk to me about it. And I was like, man, you know, it was before work started. I was like, dude, let's just pray over your foot, like right now. Like, and at that moment in time, you know, there's moments in your life when you're just full of faith, and like you're like, there is nothing that God can't do. You know, it's a high point in your spiritual walk. And I was 100% like, you know, God's going to heal your foot today. I'm just tired of you like complaining about it. And he put his foot up on my table next to my job, and I just prayed for his foot, and I said, you got to believe this. And you got to agree with me on this, because I can't heal your foot, but I believe God can.
Right.
And we both prayed, and people were walking by, and we didn't care. And literally, we prayed, and we just did a little simple prayer, like, you know, Jesus heal his foot. I mean, I'm not gonna like you know do anything crazy, like, you know, dance in a circle around it, or like, you know, use all these big crazy words that no one understands. I just, you know, declared it in Jesus' name that his foot would be healed. And he agreed. About 15 minutes later, he came back over after the line started up and we were working. He's like, dude, my foot isn't hurting anymore. And I asked him for, you know, even now if I see him, I'll be like, how's your foot doing? And he just smiles. He's like, man, my foot ain't ever been better. It's never bothered me since. So those were kind of neat little miracle God moments where, you know, God did stuff. And there's a bunch of them like that, you know, where you just those little personal, you know, one-on-one, God knows your situation. God knows what you're dealing with. And he comes down sometimes and just reminds us to say, hey, I don't know, I'll share about Sam too. We had years ago, we had a prayer meeting. We had already had our first son, Isaac, and Stephanie had the game plan that all young families do. You know, we'll have one kid in 2 years, 3 years, we'll space it out. We'll have the second kid.
Right.
You know, we had everything all planned out. Like, we'll live in our house for 5 years, and then we'll move up to the bigger house. And you sit down there and you have all these crazy little dreams that you think you have it all worked out. And it had been about 2.5, 3 years, and we went to a prayer meeting with a woman at the church we were going to. She was like my Aunt Ada there. She was like the armor bearer of the church. And she was having these prayer meetings. So, she invited us to come. Those are always weird. Like, if you don't know people real well, it's like, I'm really going to jump out here and go to a prayer meeting. And we went, and it was great. There was like a little message. And then there was like a prophecy over me and Stephanie about having another baby. And Stephanie had already, she had already said she wanted another baby. And she was basically like, get ready, because you got another baby coming. You got a child coming. So we were excited. We went home like, what is this? Like whenever you hear any kind of prophecy like that, you question whether or not.
It's always good to test it and see.
Yeah, I mean, you can just tell anybody, hey, you're getting ready to have a kid. And she said something real particular. It was kind of interesting. Like she said it would be in God's way. And I didn't understand that at the time. She was like, it's going to happen in God's way. And it was kind of like, okay, whatever. I don't know what that means, but I'm cool with it. Whatever God's way is, I'm cool with it. And a lot of times we don't realize what it means more than what we think it does. So a year went by, and 2 years went by, and we still hadn't had another baby. And we got invited, like the church we were at, we left, there was stuff happening, and we were looking for a church, and we got invited to, this kind of sounds weird, it was a church in a basement of someone's house in a neighborhood. And it was an all black church too, which was, it's something that you normally wouldn't, you just don't think about. Like, it's not a big deal, but I was like, hey, okay, we kind of stand out here. We're gonna look a little different.
Right.
So we just had an address, and when we showed up in this cul-de-sac, and I'm like, well, this is the house. It just looks like a house in the subdivision or whatever. We go inside, and there's a little dude in there, and he's playing video games. And I'm like, hey, man, what's up? He's like, hey, y'all come here for church? I was like, yeah. He's like, it's in the basement. And he's playing Pac-Man or, Mario. I don't know what it was, but it was funny. So we go down there, and there's 30-some people down there, and they have it set up really nice. And, we were just kind of, you're a little bit nervous because I'm used to going to a normal sanctuary with big tall ceiling. If you raised your hands, you hit the ceiling in there.
It's yeah, totally different environment.
Yeah, right? It totally threw us off. But it was like, I felt like we were supposed to be there. And immediately while we were there, it was great worship, great pastor there. And he like called me out, and he's like, hey, I want to pray with you. And he talked to me about my job and some job stuff that was going on that, it was definitely on mark. I was like, man, you are, God's reading my mail, obviously. And I thanked him. But we were leaving, and when we were leaving, there was an older black lady that came and talked and grabbed Stephanie's hand, and she was super sweet lady. And she said, are you pregnant? And Stephanie immediately started to cry because this has been an issue. And she was like, no. She's like, are you wanting to get pregnant? And Stephanie was like, yeah, we're trying. We kind of shared our story a little bit. She said, well, God told me that he has a promise for you, and it's still there. It's still there. So this is a total stranger, that we didn't know, comes up and talks about a prophetic word we had heard like a couple years before. So it was just kind of like God's still there, and we thought we had we'd done something wrong, or we messed up, and the God's prophecy isn't going to be fulfilled because we didn't do what we were supposed to do. We didn't move to the right house or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah. It's when you get inside your own head, it can really, and God's timing is different than ours too.
Right.
We think it's taken so long. What is it? And again. It was about a 6-year difference, I think. Yeah,
and the same thing happened again. Like we we went to the doctors to get checked out to make sure that everything was working properly because we thought we were doing something wrong. And, Stephanie went through all kinds of crazy tests. We went and my insurance actually covered like 3 attempts for fertility.
Oh, wow. I don't think that's common.
No, it wasn't. I had great insurance. And so we had done it once. And, we were really concerned about that because there's different options with fertility treatment, and some of them are kind of questionable. And we weren't comfortable with, some of them that we could end up with like 6 kids, and then we have to like pick which one you're keeping. And
yeah, that's got to be
that was like
I don't envy anyone who would find themselves in that situation.
Right. It just we weren't comfortable with making that kind of decision, and we went with the I forget what it's called. It was stressful. I know that.
Right.
It was implantation. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah.
But we did it twice, and both times it failed. And we went to Stephanie's worked at a church where she did accounting, and she became really good friends with her boss. And he started up a church, and he invited us. It was over in Indiana, so just out of nowhere, we were like, "Let's go visit." She just woke up one morning and said, "This is where we're going." And we were late because we had to go across the bridge and everything. And it was in it was kind of a neat setup they had there. It used to be a gym, and it had 2 floors. So the sanctuary was upstairs, and it had this real big open staircase. So we were trying to sneak in, and we were like coming up the steps, and then at the top was their sanctuary where all the chairs were, and we were trying to slide in. He's in the middle of preaching, and he stops, and he's like, "I had a dream last night that my old friend was going to come to church today, and she just walked in the back." Wow. And we were already like, "Oh crap!"
It's kind of cool, but you show up late, and now the spotlight's on you.
Yeah, we were totally. He's like, "I have a word for you all at the end of service." I mean, he kind so everyone in the whole sanctuary turned and was like looking at us. You're trying to hide and sneak in. So at the end of service, they had a prayer altar call, and he motioned us up there, and he told us, he said, I can't remember exactly. There was a woman there too that was like his armor bearer. She prayed for us, and they both were praying for us at the same time in agreement. And they said, "We don't know what your promise is, but it's getting ready to happen. God gave you a promise, and it's getting ready to happen."
Yeah. So let me see if I can kind of make sure we got that there. So you've had your first child, Isaac, and then it's been 6-7 years. It's been several years at this point.
Yeah.
And you've had this word from God, this prophecy that there's a promise that's coming.
Right.
And, it's going to happen God's way, God's time, and you try to make it work. You try to do,
right.
what you think is your side of the equation.
Right.
And everything's just falling through. It's not working. But I think it's interesting you said that when you said it hit your promise, because
right.
that's what was said to you earlier.
Right.
Years before, and then now you're showing up at this church a little bit late, got the spotlight shined on you.
Right.
And then afterwards, the pastor is basically giving you a word from God that you're about to receive your promise. Is that about right?
Yeah, that was it. And at that exact time, we were doing the fertility stuff. And we got a letter in the mail saying that our insurance had changed and that they were no longer using the fertility company that we were using.
Wow.
And they dropped it. And they were like, "You don't have any... You don't have that last attempt is gone." Because we all, it was like 3. We got 3. Mm-hmm. And then it was 2. It's like, well, we still got 1 more. And then before we could even try to do that one, it was taken away from us. So Stephanie went I'd say in a depression just because, she felt like she had went through so many of these little procedures and stuff to try and make things work because she thought her body was broken in some way.
Right, yeah.
And after that, she just gave it to God is what she did. And we both did. And then we both just said, this is in God's hands. And literally, our church was changing here at the time. We had a new pastor coming in, and we had an old pastor had left, and there was all kinds of crazy with that. But at that moment, it was like we released all of our And that's when I realized that it was in God's way. It was going to happen in God's ways, not man's ways. And that was kind of what it was said, not man's ways, but God's ways. And that was in like June, maybe May. And then in June, she had a pregnancy test come back. And we had spent probably $1,000 on a pregnancy test. and that one came back as, she was pregnant. And we were super excited, but at the same time, we were really scared and nervous. So we waited for a while before we told anybody. And sure enough, then we had, I was laid off from my job for a year. I was on unemployment, and they asked me to go to Chicago and work for a year. And I really don't have a choice because I'm on Cobra Insurance and my wife's pregnant. So I'm going to go wherever you tell me to go so that I have insurance to pay for, I can't afford to pay for this. And so I went to Chicago, and while I was up in Chicago for, that February of the next year is when Sam was born. It was kind of neat because, it's a great testimony. It's great it's neat when I hear it, like we went through all that. I walked through it, all the highs and lows of, where there was a lot of stuff I'm not even bringing up just because it was bad stuff that, it was hard and tough to get through. And Stephanie went through a lot, finding out, just trying to think that something was wrong with her. But, God moved, and we have Samuel, and then Hannah came after that, and she was a complete surprise. That was just, we thought that, okay, we have two, we won't be able to have any more kids because that was like, and we weren't even trying, and, boom, she's like, something's wrong, I got to go, and then here comes Hannah.
Well, that's funny. And it's interesting in your story there that we would love it sometimes if God were to move or something were to break or something great were to happen when you're already experiencing something good. Like it's one good thing after another. And sure, that happens to some people sometimes, but it seems like more often than not, especially when we're talking about God intervening or some kind of type of God involvement, more often than not, it seems like when you come to the end of yourself, you don't even know how to get there. You don't even know the path to get there. We think we do, we try, sometimes, but when you get kind of to the end of yourself, you've exhausted your resources, and there at the end, there's God waiting for you. So on one hand, that's kind of nice because it's, God's there ahead of time waiting for you. It can feel that way, but also it's stressful and can hurt. And you go through the journey there, getting there, that can be pretty rough. So, and speaking of journeys, I know you're doing this grain-free homesteading. It's been for over a year now, hasn't it been?
We're at 2 years.
2 years.
That we've been on social media and YouTube.
Yeah. And I think I saw one that was pretty interesting. There was a post you guys did, was a picture of the butter. I think it was ants flocking to like 3 different types of butter. And one of them, I think, was like a vegan butter. And why don't you tell us what happened to that? Because I think you got some people not happy with you. And then